Paying tribute to a Kremlin critic shot dead on the streets of Moscow. Mourners mark the murder of Russian opposition leader Boris Nemtsov. At a time of rising nationalism, are opponents considered a healthy counterbalance or treated as traitors? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Martine Dennis. He had at one time been tipped for the top job in Russia, but Boris Nemtsov's political ambitions changed when he began to challenge the Kremlin. He emerged as a leading figure in an opposition movement seeking to revive its fortunes. But 2 days before a rally he'd been helping to organise against Russia's involvement in Ukraine and a faltering economy, he was shot dead. The Russian President Vladimir Putin condemned the shooting as a provocation, and he vowed to bring those responsible for what he called a vile and cynical murder to justice. Now, the motives for the shooting aren't clear, but critics contest the murder was the result of a climate of fear in Russia, where opponents are considered by some to be traitors working to destroy the country. Al Jazeera's Rory Challens helped set up our discussion with this report for Inside Story.
It has surprised many people that this demonstration has even been allowed to take place right in the heart of Russia's capital, Moscow. Normally, opposition demonstrations are kept way on the outskirts of town. But maybe the Kremlin feels that this demonstration, because it is in mourning for Boris Nemtsov, is different, and that sorrow and grief are more manageable public emotions than political anger. But have a look at what's going on. Have a look at the profusion of Russian flags being carried in this demonstration. At the moment in Russia, there is a very heightened sense of patriotism and nationalism. It is being inspired by the public television stations, and it's being driven by the Kremlin. What these people seem to be saying is that the Kremlin and the TV stations do not dictate for them the idea of Russianness. These people might have a different idea of Russianness, and that's what they're doing here. That's why they're bringing these flags. Now, the route is going to take them up the embankment here and round and past St. Basil's, across the bridge and past the very spots where Boris Nemtsov was killed on Friday night. He, of course, was supposed to be on this demonstration himself. Now he's dead, and this is a mourning for the man himself.
And so to our guests. In London, we have Ben Judah, Associate Fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations and author of the book Fragile Empire, How Russia Fell in and Out of Love with Vladimir Putin. In Moscow, we have Sergey Markov, political strategist and public spokesman for President Putin. And also in London, Martine McCauley, a Russia analyst and historian and author of The Rise and Fall of the Soviet Union. Welcome to you all, gentlemen. Sergey Markov in Moscow, can I start with you? So we have a prominent figure gunned down literally in the shadow of the Kremlin, very close to the famous St. Basil's Cathedral, perhaps the most closely surveilled part of the Russian capital. What does this tell us about the state of Russia today?
First, Boris Nemtsov has been my friend for almost 20 years. We have different political views, and we discuss very much, but very big respect. Even he was being very sporty man, and he helped me a lot of time by his advices in this sport activity and in other areas. And of course, it's very pity that he been died. The fact that he had been died nearby the Kremlin for the majority of Russians means that this killing has been organized by outside of Russia for destabilization of Russia by enemies of Vladimir Putin, and Boris Nemtsov should play a role of sacrificing victim for organizing revolution and civil war as we see it in Ukraine. And organize the same which organize the coup in Kiev, which bring to power illegal terrorist junta which now run the Ukraine. And of course, it's need to stop such kind of events, this destabilization of Russia.
And can I go to you then, Ben Judah in London? And from Sergey, we're getting a narrative which suggests that this has been orchestrated by outside forces with the sole intention of destabilizing Russia and certainly destabilizing the Russian president. Is that how you see it?
Well, I'd just like to inform the viewers a little bit more about the kind of person that Sergey is. And sadly, Sergey comes from a generation of right-wing Russian intellectuals that embraced Putin. And as they became very successful in this system, they ended up having to say more and more and more totally ridiculous things in order to justify their position close to the Kremlin. So poor Sergey has ended up in this really tragic position of having to say completely ludicrous things just because that's the Kremlin line. And I think it's a very sad situation for these people to be in, and what the viewers are seeing is another case study of people who have been twisted and, in a sense, destroyed as independent minds.
Martin McCauley also in London. So from Ben, we're getting an alternative version of events. Nemtsov's murder didn't actually suit Mr. Putin. So those who are suggesting that the Kremlin had some involvement are probably off-key, aren't they?
I met Boris Nemtsov both in Russia and in London, and he was a charming person, very easy to talk to, very fluent and so on. And I would classify him as basically a Western social democrat. He wanted the rule of law, he wanted liberal democracy, he wanted secure property relations and so on. He wanted that type of life for the average Russian. And he found himself in a small minority in Russia because his support base is basically the middle class, intelligentsia and so on. And it doesn't really reach any deeper than that. So therefore, from my point of view, I find it difficult to believe that the Kremlin would then assassinate him, because he's not a major political opponent. The major political opponents are those who would have support among the working class and the peasantry. Because if there is any economic problems coming up, and I would see them coming up in, say, 6 or 9 months' time, situation at present is not that all that bad, because oil prices again are up to $60 a barrel, and Russia is not in economic crisis at present. So therefore I would see the Kremlin at present not being behind this assassination. I'm only guessing here. And then the point of view, Sergey Markov's point of view, that somebody outside Russia is responsible for this. This goes back to, if you like, Stalin. It goes back to the Soviet view that anything that happens, anything which is nasty in the Soviet Union was bound to come from outside influence and so on. It couldn't actually emerge from the Soviet Union itself. So this is the same narrative. Anything that's really bad in Russia has to be the result of some foreign influence and so on. And I find that very difficult, because who would in fact want to assassinate somebody like Boris Nemtsov? Because from a Western point of view, he's saying the things which Americans and most British and French and Germans would say, we agree with him and so on. There's no reason to take him out, because he's not saying anything which is really anti-Western.
Right.
Those in Russia, those now.
Well, Martin, this is a perfect.
I think it's very important to clarify this point here.
Sorry, Ben. Sorry, Ben. You were going to say something.
It's very important to clarify this point, that Russia is a police state. People like Boris Nemtsov were under 100% surveillance, all day, every day. Boris Nemtsov couldn't walk down to the road or go to the loo without the successor agencies.
Okay, well, let's put that to Sergey.
Ben, let's put
this to Sergey, Ben.
No, we're not putting it aside.
Ben is saying, Sergey
it's completely ridiculous
Markov,
to think.
Ben is suggesting that modern-day Russia is a police state and that opposition figures are constantly trailed by official surveillance. So why then was this allowed to happen? That's what Ben is suggesting.
You know, it's an interesting question. You know, I'm taking part in the discussion of what's happening in Ukraine in Russian TV every day. In every discussion in Moscow on Russian TV, we have a representative or two or three or more representative of Kyiv point of view. But no one representative of Moscow point of view, or Donetsk point of view, or Lugansk point of view on Kyiv, on Ukrainian TV in Kyiv. It means that Russia is free country. We have freedom of discussion. And Boris Nemtsov, he was giving, almost dozen interview every day to Russian media. We are free country. But in Ukraine, you have junta, which is imposed terroristic dictatorship of ultranationalists, including neo-Nazis. And Great Britain, United States, and European Union support this governmental terror of Kyiv engaged.
Okay, Sergey. I think we've got your point, Sergey.
Can you?
Mr. Markov
we've got your point.
Let's
go to Martin. Martin, it seems as though all roads seem to be leading to the conflict in Ukraine. Why?
Well, it obviously divides opinion, because there are those who believe that Russia broke international law by assimilating Crimea, by assisting the separatists in eastern Ukraine. The Western opinion basically sides with that. And there are those inside Russia who say that ethnic Russians in Ukraine have the right to organize because they don't want to be under the same government as those in Kiev or in Lviv and so on. They see them as extreme nationalists and so on. They want their own autonomy and so on.
But it's led, hasn't it, to an almost unprecedented level of nationalism.
Yes, and this is a bonus, if you like, for President Vladimir Putin, because the integration of Crimea in Russia, it was part of Russia until the 1950s, coming back into Russia, that was a tremendous gain and therefore boosted the national pride and nationalism within Russia, and the defeat of the Kievan military, the inability of President Poroshenko's troops to halt the advance of the separatists, that also gives them a tremendous boost because they see themselves as winning. Russia has had a very, very bad time over the last 25 years, seeing itself really being the doghouse and being picked upon and not being respected. And now it's shown itself like a lion who's actually standing up on its hind legs and saying to the world, we've arrived and we're successful and we're going forward and you should take notice of this. Now, I would not link the assassination of Boris Nemtsov to Ukraine. Because I think it has to do with internal, domestic Russian politics. And you have to look at Nemtsov as a person. He was very brave, as Markov has said. He gave interviews all the time, and he was free to express his opinion, and he was very outspoken, and he was very critical of the oligarchs, the way the economy was run, because after all,
Martin, can I stop you there? Because we're actually going now to look a little bit more closely at Boris Nemtsov. We're going to just take a little look at how he rose to prominence under the former President Boris Yeltsin. He was seen as part of a wave of young politicians who emerged after the fall of the Soviet Union. Now, the former physicist was elected to Russia's parliament. That was in 1990. Swiftly gaining a post as a regional governor. In 1997, Nemtsov was made deputy prime minister in charge of economic reform, with observers at the time speculating that he was being groomed as Yeltsin's successor. But the 1998 economic crisis cost him his job and saw him go on to found a number of opposition movements. Nemtsov had dropped in and out of the political limelight ever since then, and he had most recently been hoping to kickstart an opposition revival and he'd frequently appeared on lists of so-called traitors that had been published online. And coming to you now, Ben, I'm presuming that you're going to suggest that in this current wave of nationalism that is sweeping through Russia, that there is no space, or there's very little tolerance, if you like, for any voice of an opposing nature.
I'm just going to repeat myself that Boris Nemtsov was under 100% surveillance by Russian security services, and it was impossible that a plot could have been afoot to kill him, and the FSB would not have been aware of it. Where he was killed is one of the places under the most surveillance on planet Earth, and his movements or anybody moving around him was under such surveillance that's simply impossible.
How would that have suited President Putin, Ben? How would that have suited President Putin? If what you're suggesting is true, how does that work for Vladimir Putin?
The Kremlin is not really government, it's like a court, and you have oligarchs and security chiefs and secret police chiefs and generals, and as the Russian economy goes into a dark place and Russia runs up against big problems in its banking sector, there are rumbles of discontent and unease, and shooting Boris Nemtsov would help Putin, because it now shows these people that if you're even thinking about it, you will pay with your life for it.
Sergey Markov,
so Putin now has the
there
Russian
are quite
elite
a few
exactly
accusations there from Ben.
Terrified.
There are quite a few serious allegations coming from Ben there, suggesting that it's not a real proper government reflecting any kind of democratic wish. It's actually an authoritarian state that we're looking at in present-day Russia.
I believe that Ben support terroristic junta in Kiev, as I heard from him. And he believes that it's exactly democratic government. The government which now arrested a few thousand of political opponents, put them to the prison and kill some of them in Pinochet style. The Kiev government killed 100 anti-fascist activists in Odessa. And in Donbass, they're not separatists, they're anti-fascist, they're against
Okay, but you are talking
methods,
about the Ukrainian situation again.
Yeah,
can we get you to focus back on the Kremlin, and what is the situation in Russia today? Can you focus on that and try and address some of those allegations that have come from Ben?
I already mentioned, I believe personally that assassination of Boris Nemtsov had been organized by Kiev government, who already became terroristic organization. If we are talking about Russia, we know that Vladimir Putin very popular among the population, and we have freedom of speech. And Ben can come to Russia and can have speeches and humorous speeches on Russian TV. He can give interview to the Russian media. It's exactly characteristic of the freedom of speech and freedom of demonstration. Today, we have a big demonstration in the center of Moscow, which have been organized by opposition. It's because Russia free country. And the popularity of Vladimir Putin so high among Russian population, not because he led a authoritarian group of the oligarchs, but because he is against oligarchs.
But we can't ignore the fact. We can't ignore the fact, can we, that there is a long and rather illustrious line of opposition voices who've died in mysterious circumstances, and I think I'm being generous there, that we cannot ignore, can we? There does seem within the modern Russian state to be a tendency to do away with critical voices that are not welcome by the Kremlin. And we could name them, couldn't we? We could start with Sergey Markov in 2003, and the list goes on.
To my regret, the political assassination have been very popular in 90s. And one of the reasons why Russian people so much support Vladimir Putin, because this period of political assassination almost over when Putin come to power and establish social stability and economic increasing prosperity. We have only killing of Anna Politkovskaya, now assassination of Boris Nemtsov. And we believe that exactly enemies Vladimir Putin organized to undermine such political stability, which majority of the Russian people like so much. As I already mentioned, criticism of Vladimir Putin has a lot of opportunity to go to Russian TV every day. Russian opposition control leading newspapers as «Ведомости», «Коммерсант», «Независимая газета», «Новая газета», «Эхо Москвы», and a lot of printing media. Russian opposition has a lot of opportunity to express their opinion, but it's not so popular.
Okay, I have to move. I've heard that point. Let me go to Martin in London. President Putin was very, very swift in his condemnation of the murder of this opposition figure, and he's invested quite a lot of capital in terms of the investigation. He's put senior police officers onto it. How significant is it then, the way this investigation is conducted? Because we know that Russian police are pretty good at finding the hitmen, but not quite so good when it comes to finding those who've given the orders for the killings.
That's the key question, because all this talk about Ukraine, I would look for the reasons behind his assassination in the economic sphere. There is an argument that he was very, very critical of the corruption. He named names, he produced reports, he authored reports, and apparently he's going to author another report indicating and pointing to oligarchs and others who engaged in corruption and in nefarious affairs. So therefore, another area is to look at the economic one and take it away from the political, because they did not want Nemtsov to reveal what they were saying and what they were doing and all their machinations and so on. It's absolutely right. They may in fact identify the hitman, because he would be on CCTV. It was all filmed. It's a white car and so on. And in the most prominent part of Moscow, that bridge which is near Red Square and so on, and that's known to the whole world and so on. So they may in fact then identify the hitman. But it's very, very difficult then to identify the contractor, the person who in fact gave the order, because it may have gone through about 15 hands. Because it'd be very, very difficult, intricate and so on, to identify this person. Where is this person sitting, and who in fact gave that order, and why did he give the order, and did they come together as a group and decide that Nemtsov was too dangerous for their economic interests, that he was in fact spoiling their business and their making of money and so on. So you have almost an incredibly difficult task of identifying the end decision maker, and in the past the FSB and the others have failed to do this. If you look at political associations, Politkovskaya and people like that, people were found and tried, and some found guilty and so on. The question always arises, were they actually the real people? Were they in fact the people who gave the orders or carried out the orders and so on? So Russia at present, from the point of view of the police and of the Minister of Internal Affairs, have a very, very difficult task in identifying the criminality of certain groups. And as the economic situation becomes more difficult,
okay,
I would say
Ben,
it's only just beginning.
Thank you, Martin. Ben, in the current climate, we've got to look at it from the Russian point of view, haven't we? Russia feels itself to be under attack. It feels itself to be encircled by NATO and its allies. It feels completely whipped by the sanctions that are being imposed on it from the West. In that context, is it understandable, therefore...
Well, let me tell you about what the atmosphere is.
Is it understandable, therefore, that this rise of nationalism has taken a hold of Russia?
The atmosphere inside the Russian elite is one of fear. Putin is frightened of coups. He sees coups and menace everywhere. The Russian economy is moving into a crisis in its banking sector. And there is a sense that we've moved into a much more dangerous era, that now they killed Nemtsov, they could kill anybody, these mysterious dark forces. And there's low-level panic and unease and a feeling that Russia has become a dictatorship, and the dictatorship has torn up all the rules. And even though Russian TV propaganda is talking about fear of the West, the real fear within Russian high society is fear of Vladimir Putin.
And Sergey, to you in Moscow, it sounds very much as though it's a very unpleasant atmosphere for anybody who might want to suggest an alternative way of thinking in Russia today, and it will be completely discouraging to anybody who wants to stand up and put their head up above the parapet and take part in opposition politics. Does an opposition really exist in Russia today?
You know, those who are talking about not existing of opposition in Russia, they, I don't know, either they are out of reality or they just so strong propagandists. Because we have a position, a communist opposition, which is mostly popular in Russia, and we have nationalistic opposition, we have liberal opposition, we have liberal so-called system opposition, liberal anti-system opposition, and we have representatives of all these different kinds of opposition on Russian TV every day, hundreds of times.
All right,
already mentioned.
Okay, Sergey
Russian opposition
Markov
control some of the printing media.
I can see we're not going to agree, are we, on this particular edition of Inside Story, but can I thank you all, gentlemen, for taking part, and perhaps we can get together and continue this conversation another time. But thank you all very much indeed. Ben Judah in London, Sergey Markov in Moscow, and of course Martin McCauley also in London. Thank you all very much. And thank you for joining us. If you've got anything you'd like to add, any comments, any questions, remember you can always go to our programme page at aljazeera.com. You can also post your comments at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And then there's the Twitter sphere. You can go to at AJ Inside Story. I'm Martine Dennis, and from the whole Inside Story team, it's bye for now.